All right, welcome to Mountain Real Estate. Today we are going to have a conversation with Michael Rath. So, welcome, Michael.
I'm very happy to be here.
Awesome. Michael, why don't you tell us about yourself?
I've been a resident of Summit County for 25 years, and I like to play outside as much as everybody else does up here. And I also have a business. Actually, I have two businesses. One of them is Trilogy Partners. It's a construction management company specializing in single family homes. And then I also have a design company which does interior design and all sorts of high-tech modeling and stuff like that for the same market.
Awesome. So sounds like some cool toys and you get to actually see them. You get to design them and see them come to life. So
Yeah,
that's
I love that. A lot of builders, they're not part of the design process, and a lot of designers aren't part of the build process. We, uh, we're basically nose to tail. We're there at the birth, and we're there when we give the house finally over to the parents that are going to raise it for the rest of its life. So that's one of the ways we think of it.
that's a good way. That's a good way of putting it because it's like coming home from the hospital, but you still got to raise it and make sure it turns out all right at the end of the day.
Yeah, I'm the parent until I give it up to the final parents. There's not a lot of um, different steps and stages where something gets passed along again and again and again to new people. So,
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. So tell us a little bit more about Trilogy, like how did it start and kind of like what is your specialty?
well, my brother and I were living in New York City, and we were both involved in the motion picture business, and that's a very stressful business. And so, um, we were, longtime visitors of Colorado, and our mother actually lived out here. And so we decided to take some time off. And so after a couple of weeks out here, we started to get a little bit bored and antsy because we were used to working so much. And so we thought, well, why don't we look for a house to flip? So we looked around for a house to remodel. We couldn't find one. And then we happened upon this company that provided timber frames for new construction. We started talking to them. Before we knew it, we bought a lot and we were digging a hole in the ground and building our first house. And what happened was we learned a heck of a lot, but we were farm boys, so we're used to a lot of having to know a lot of different um, we know how to swing a hammer, and we also know how to do a budget. So we finished the first house, and it sold immediately. And we thought, well, maybe we're pretty good at this. And then we decided to put off going back to New York City for a while, and we built a second house, and it was bigger and fancier than the first one, and that sold right away. And um, we had entered the second house in the parade of homes, and suddenly we had people calling us saying, "Well, you build our house for us." And by that time, we were, so in love with the Colorado lifestyle, and we're starting to forget about our film career. So that's kind of how it started. We just went from the first house to the second to the third, and then it became a real business. And and here I am, 25 years later.
Crazy. That's awesome. I do want to go back before we go forward. Were you a movie star in New York or what were you doing?
Well, I went to New York because I wrote a short film. But once they found out that I'd been to business school, they were more interested in whether I was good with spreadsheets than whether I was a good writer. And that's kind of how it goes in Hollywood. There's lots of people who want to write something, and there's not many people who want to manage projects. So that's how I got into film as a production manager and production auditor. I basically controlled the purse strings of the projects. We were mostly in lower budget independent films when they were all the rage back in New York City in the 90s and early 2000s.
Nice. So if you can handle movie production management, then you can definitely handle construction crews.
It's actually very funny because the first house we budgeted, we used a, budgeting program that we use for film. And we just changed the names, but they are very, very similar. And I think that's one of the reasons we've been successful. Part of the reasons it's successful as builders is because the financial management part of it is absolutely critical. And and also the planning before you start building is absolutely critical. And movie production, we have long pre-production periods where we make sure that everything is planned down to the smallest detail. Because once you start shooting, you can't waste any time, and everybody has to be in the right place at the right time, for every single day. So organization is key.
That's awesome. So, so you took what you learned in the theater business and you and your brother built a couple houses and then you decided to keep going. What is your and you're managing the projects is kind of like one of your tools or one of your niches. What tools do you use to do that? And I think you have a special tool, right?
There's a number of different ways to manage a project. On the financial end, of course, there's budgeting and knowing what things are going to cost before you start a project. We use a project management platform. We've gone from spreadsheets to a very organized platform that's also an interface for all of the subcontractors and the owners. So it's a very transparent system. The other thing we do is, if we're involved during architecture and the design period, we use 3D modeling to manage our projects. And that may sound a little bit strange, but we have a process called project management modeling because as we build the house in the computer, we uncover, whatever difficulties we're going to have during construction. And some of those are errors and omissions caused by, different design partners that we have not being in sync with one another. But so it's a kind of a twofold process with project management platforms and then also the 3D modeling process. We say we're going to build it several times in the computer before we build it in the real world, and that's one of the things that makes us very, very different and why our projects are usually right on budget and on time. There's also the experience that the owner has. They get to live in the house before we've even started to build it, and they get to uncover the problems and explore possibilities that they wouldn't otherwise be able to see with 2D drawings. So, that's basically our organizational process is the modeling process and then the project management platform.
Yeah, that's so I come from an engineering background and it's civil engineering where we do transportation and inevitably they get in the field and they find a utility and it's the same as new home construction. You get out there and you discover, oh, actually, well, this actually happened today. We built in the setback. That's a whole nother issue. Or your plumbing is interacting with your electrical in a way that you don't want. And I think that those are expensive. What I've learned in the engineering world is those are expensive and harder to mitigate when you do them in the field. But if you can look at them, like overlay them together up front, it's a lot easier to mitigate and a lot more less expensive to
Yeah,
mitigate.
I mean, real world problems are world problems, but problems in the computer are usually very cheap and easy to fix. So that's in a way, um, I think of most houses are built, most of the houses we're building, which are, custom homes, are only built once. So imagine if somebody came to you and said, I just designed this car and there's only been one of them ever made, and do you want to buy it? And you would be like, I probably not because nobody's tested it. You don't know what's going to happen when you're 500 miles from home, right? Um, but most people are willing to do that with a custom home. And what we thought is, well, maybe our process can put some mileage on the house before the people even move in. And solving a problem in design is very inexpensive. Solving it, during construction, and a lot of it is stuff that that no one really thought was going to happen, or they would have fixed it earlier. You're building something and then you discover a problem. Like you can't vent a fireplace. You have a fireplace in a room and there's code requirements, and suddenly that fireplace can't be a fireplace because there's no way to get the vent out of the room. And we've discovered all sorts of problems like that. And we're like, hey, stop. We're not ready to go. Let's spend a little bit more time on design and uh, and figure it out before we start spending the client's money.
That's awesome. I feel like that's what clients like to hear. They like controlled risk and not spending too much money.
Yeah, I should have used an analogy of a plane. No one would ever get in a plane that's what, you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah. Yeah. I get the idea. So you've obviously been doing this for a long time. You've helped a lot of different people. You started with your brother as a farm boy coming from New York. What is your why? What makes you continue to do this 25 years later?
Um, that's a good question. I think it's well, I love the creative process. And I actually, when I first got into this business, um, you discover things about yourself when you take on a different role. And I discovered that I have a head for design, and I didn't know that. So I love creating things. I love taking something that's just an idea and then being able to drive by it 5 years later, and just, it went from an idea to a real thing, and people are living there and enjoying their lives. But I think the biggest part is the collaboration with my clients. Um, most of my clients have a dream, they have families, and this dream has been long-standing, and I'm the one that gets to help them deliver it. And it's a very big, important dream. I mean, it's one of the biggest decisions they're ever going to make. And they've saved for that dream, and they've hoped for that dream, and they never thought it would become real. And then you're there the day that you hand the keys to them, and their dream is a reality. And it's a wonderful, feeling to be able to provide that. So that relationship part of it is super important to me. I love collaboration. That's one of the things about film I love too, was a whole bunch of really smart people getting together and doing something that hadn't been done before. I also love working with most of my subcontractors. We have a few tough ones here and there, but most of those guys, you're a part of helping them provide for their families. Most of them have children, and it's nice to be part of a community that's actually making good things in this world, right? And leaving a legacy behind. I was yesterday in a home, um, and a guy who was a hardwood flooring installer walked in, and I recognized him, but not completely. And he came up to me and he said, "Mike, how you been?" And I realized he was now a guy in his mid, maybe 40. And when I first met him, he was like 18 years old, just starting out in the business. So he remembered me a little better than than I did him, because he looked completely different.
Yeah.
But that was so cool. And we spent some time talking about projects we've done together, and it was really a nice moment. So I like that part of it too. People, I guess, collaborating with people, meeting new people.
Yeah.
I really enjoy that.
That's awesome. And that's good to hear that it's on both sides, like the client side and working with people, but also like your teams and the community and the people that we live by and work by and play with are also like part of your teams.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's awesome. What would your clients say about you, do you think?
I think it depends. My clients going back 25 years, they're in my life forever. I'm in their life forever. That's one of the great things about this business. When you build somebody a home, you're going to be with each other forever. Um, I think that some of them would say, well, I'm a super creative guy because we work together creatively.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of times I'm working with a husband and a wife. Um, and so one of those partners will have different responsibilities than the other. So, and it's not necessarily the guy is the money and the woman is the creative. That's a stereotype. Um, but I think that the people who are the creative side of that relationship would say, "Oh, he's so creative and he can draw anything and it's just amazing." And I would never do anything without 3D modeling. And I think the financial person in that relationship with me would say, well, he's super organized and he really cares about the money and I know he lays at sleep at night trying to figure out how to make something work for us that we really want, but maybe can't afford. Um, and it is true. We all take this very seriously. Even my employees I'll get a text at like 2 in the morning. Like, what do you think about this? They're worried about something. There's a problem that they need to solve. We're, we we're always very, very concerned about the project, but also about making the clients feel as good as we can make them feel during a process that also often has a lot of ups and downs. Um, and but I think, I would like to think that any project and any client I've ever had that they know how much we really care about them and the project and their happiness. And I think it's you can call that integrity, honesty, whatever. We just want to do the right thing, because if we don't do the right thing, we don't sleep well. So we continue to do the right thing. So they would probably say that about me.
Yeah.
I'm a persistent warrior. I'm a persistent warrior and worrier. Both.
Well, if you run out of things to worry about, we've got lots of unsolvable problems here in the Day household that we can share with you if you're getting too much sleep. No, that's really I feel like that's very compelling. I think we that type of relationship is what we strive for in the real estate side of the business, but like I think the builder side of real estate, we don't hear that as often. And I think some of that is builders are building to scale or they're building large developments. And that's obviously a different business model than what you have. So yours is very high touch and very personal. And the fact that you said you build these lifelong relationships with your clients and you're in the same community as them many years later is like a very different builder client relationship than my perspective of new build developers. And that's refreshing to hear.
Yeah, I think there's a downside to being a pleaser, and that you're always trying to make other people happy, and sometimes that's not possible. But if I was going to advise someone on who to partner with for new home construction, single family custom home construction, I would say you definitely want somebody, first of all, with supreme organizational skills, and then somebody who's a pleaser, um, and has a lot of experience. The the creative part of it is super important too. But I mean, if your builder is not a quote unquote pleaser and is not well organized, keep looking. Yeah,
Yeah, that's great advice.
yeah.
So we've talked a little bit about kind of like what your client's perspective is of you. Who is the ideal client for your type of work?
Um, that's a really good question, because I want to do a good job for anybody and everybody, but um, I also believe in and the psychological pairing. It's kind of like you're going to be in a partnership with these people, and I mean, there's a contract involved and there's money involved and all this kind of stuff. So you're basically going into business with somebody for a couple of years. And um, for me, when I was describing what I love about the business, I love the creative side of it, but I also love the business side of it. So I would like, my favorite clients, one of my clients is a CEO and of a pretty large 5,000 person company. He was a dream to work with because the business side of it, and he knows about the ups and downs of business, and that you're not going to get every sub that walks in the door is not going to be perfection. And, he knows how to roll with the punches, and he likes to get into the numbers and figure out ways to make people happen. Um, that's one of my favorite clients, highly organized, experienced business person. And then I love people that are hyper creative and like will sit with me while we're designing. And I mean, it's like being in a dream state. 3 or 4 or 5 hours go by and suddenly you go, what happened? And then you're looking at what you created on the screen, and it's like, wow, how did we even get there? I mean, that was nothing. And then look at this. This is going to be so great. So that side of it is great. Um, I also like clients who trust me, who've done their research and know that I have the experience that I have and have done a deep dive on me because I had some celebrity clients, fairly famous people that I did a couple of houses with. And at one point I said to them, you guys placed an awful lot of trust in me. How is it, you don't know me that well. And they're like, dude, we did the deep dive, and you know how it is when a producer is standing over our backs telling us how to make a movie? That drives us crazy. So there's no way we want to be the producer standing over your back telling us how to build a house. And so I like it when people let me kind of do my thing too. Um,
Hmm.
that freedom is, it's inspiring. When somebody trusts you like that, you just go, you go the distance, and then you go even further for them. So.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. It's hard to let go sometimes, but trusting the experts, I feel like always pans out better than I'm a control freak, so I have a hard time letting go, but I'm sure your clients are better.
Yeah, I'm not running a bungee jumping company.
Yeah.
So, there's, it's not that kind of, I like it. I like it when they can just sort of relax into the process. And it's funny, I'll tell them that this should not be stressful. I have their back. Try to enjoy it. Try to enjoy this process. It's, I think they enjoy it in retrospect. They're like, remember when we were doing this, and remember how this came to be, and this is so cool. They don't remember the bad moments. So I try to tell them to look forward and enjoy the process. It may be a once in a lifetime journey that you're on. We're all on together, so you might as well make the most of it.
Yeah. And I love what you said earlier about like this is a dream for a lot of people and they've worked really hard and saved a lot of money and planned for it. And this, you're just like helping those dreams come to fruition. That's very rewarding to see. I think a lot of times people are like, oh, well, they're just really rich and they can do this. But there's a lot of people that have worked very hard, and this is like really the culmination of a lot of hard work. So it's cool to see how you work with them and bring that to life.
Yeah, we're not in Aspen where that you have that generational wealth.
Hmm.
Um, a lot of my clients are, doctors. I mean, I can't even think right now of any of my clients who came in with this sort of um, with an entitlement that you sometimes see from people who have a lot of money but didn't necessarily earn it.
Yeah.
All of the people I've built for have worked really, really hard, and they've raised kids, and it is kind of funny because I built for a doctor and his family about 6 or 7 years ago, and they had kids that were still in high school, but they were already imagining grandkids, So you're planning for the next, couple of decades, and that's really amazing, to be thinking that far ahead and yeah, it's a special place to be.
It is. And I did a podcast recently with some friends that have a house with their parents and they have kids. And it's really, I have other friends that have like a multi-generation house. And it's really like everybody has said, it's not the fancy kitchen or that you have 10 beds that can actually sleep everyone. It's really like the fact that you have a place that people want to be together and you can like create those memories and like that's where your grandkid you get to spend the most time with your grandkids maybe and it becomes more than just a house. It's like really like a home.
Yeah, a lot of the times the houses in the summit are kind of a honeypot or a gathering spot where um, the kids are now all over the country, but this is where they come back for the holidays. And most people love coming to the mountains in Summit County. So um, yeah, it's a gathering place that you're creating for them. Um, but I don't want anyone to think that I don't want to design and build for people who don't have um, really nice big budgets, because that that's where we get super creative, and that's where some of our tools really have their biggest mistake is or not mistake is effect is being able to manage larger projects that are more complex, that have more pieces and parts to them, managing bigger budgets. When I worked in film, I was managing some pretty large budgets, so we know how to do that too. So
Yeah, so your tools can be scaled up or down as needed
we, they
or
we're
up. We'll just go up.
it's really interesting because a lot of what we're doing now, and we're ahead of the curve, is we're adopting more of a commercial management project management scenario than most home builders. It just like we were early to jump on a lot of the high tech stuff, which is 3D design and rendering and being able to build a house in the computer first. Our management practices are very, commercial is a lot of it's about money management. And so we looked at we the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, the biggest building, tallest building in the world. How do you build something like that? Well, it's an incredible undertaking, and there's so much organization and technology involved in developing a building like that, and so many skill sets. And what we've been able to do, because technology, it's really expensive at first and it's very unaffordable, but it gradually becomes less and less experiment. We grabbed for that technology about 10 years ago, and we started pulling it all into what we do. So we're using a lot of the same processes and procedures that you would use on a billion-dollar building, because they become affordable. It also meant we had to spend a lot of weekends learning how to do new things, right? They say, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, we don't believe that. We're learning every single day here. So one of our, we're very competitive, and one of the things that we try to do is stay up ahead of the technology firms and do what companies, 50, 100 times larger than us would do. And so we've gotten a reputation for being very tech savvy and employ that technology to the fullest. And even on I mean, everybody has an iPad these days, but we're going to have, that 3D home that we built in the office. We're going to have that 3D home with us on the job site, so we can answer questions, readily with an iPad and the same thing with our communication with our subcontractors. It's all done in a very sophisticated and efficient way, so that if there's ever an issue, that we can backtrack and find where the problem lies and solve it.
Yeah,
So we're small, but we're very large.
small but mighty.
Already, right.
Yeah.
Right.
um well that's really cool. I feel like there's a lot more that we could tap into with kind of your technology, but I want to take us kind of macro level. So for some of our listeners that are maybe thinking about buying a house in the mountains or maybe building, I know we're in a volatile time, is what I'll say, in the like macroeconomics. How do you think how do you think that affects our next few years of construction? And then like what are you seeing in Summit County specifically with like challenges or opportunities?
Well, building in Summit County is always a challenge in terms of what it costs to build here. And there's a lot of reasons for that. That's not going to change. And one of the things that is, I'm a big believer in sustainable construction and all of that. Um, but you're going to see even more of that. It's the so that's adding also to the price of the house. That people worry a lot about what things are going to cost. And I think sometimes they worry more about that than how those costs are going to be managed. And we've actually become better at managing the cost of these homes through our management systems. So our even well, the cost of our homes hasn't gone up since even COVID. So that's because you become better at managing money and you get better subs and you have fewer problems. So I would say, if we all have concerns about the economy, it seems like that's never ending uh, especially in Summit County, or any of the mountain regions.
Yeah.
Um, I'm not hyper concerned about that. Interest rates are higher than they used to be. Um, but I, I can't predict the future, but I'm not saying that houses are going to become twice as expensive as they were before. It's just more important that you find somebody that knows how to manage your money well. Um, as other trends, we don't have as much vacant land in Summit County as we used to. So people are looking over Park County and other adjacent counties where they can have, an equivalent mountain lifestyle. Um, in Summit County, we're probably going to be seeing more. We have a lot of old inventory out there, a lot of houses that were built, in some in the 70s, 80s, 90s that are functionally a little bit obsolete, depending on how well they were maintained. But from an energy standpoint, um, all of them are not nearly as efficient as what we're building today. The other trend we're seeing is, and I'm a big proponent of this, is because we design in 3D, we're often able to scale the size of a house down so the clients can do more with less. And that's a great way to save money too, right? Just have just as great a house, but there's no wasted space in it. And 3D design is incredible for that. So that's what I'm seeing is houses just not being quite as large as they used to be. An 8 or 9 or 10,000 foot monster is, it's, I guess for some people it'll always be necessary, but for the vast majority of people, that's not necessary. So I think, in general, what used to be a 5,000 square foot house is probably going to be more like a 4,200 square foot house. We're seeing that. So what I'm saying is don't be discouraged. Just find the right team that can get what you want, maybe for less money than you thought, even with prices rising. So
Yeah, that's definitely inspiring to hear that there's a lot of like big mainstream media, but then there's boots on the ground and there are still people that are able to fulfill their dreams, and there might be changes, but they're not as drastic as what we're hearing.
yeah, and um, we survive through adaptation, and sometimes that adaptation, we thought it was going to be a hardship, but it ends up being a blessing. So,
That's good. I feel like we should just stop right there. I have one more question, but that was really good.
uh,
Yeah. And I really loved what you said about um, spaces getting more efficient and smaller. I just had a client the other day that was like, Well, there's two living spaces, which might be nice for some, but I actually want all of my family to be together in the living space. So I think you're right that there's like, we went through this phase of like bigger and more. And I think we're kind of in this contraction phase where it's quality over quantity in a sense.
Yeah, well, we had that whole van life thing going on. So
Yeah.
people were really, and then we had tiny homes. So we're not going to those extremes, but
No,
no, I mean, ultimately, your happiness is not measured in square feet. So,
that's a good point. And anyone who's lived in a van or a tiny home, or in our case, a camper for 40 days together, will say that's a short-term solution, and it's definitely not a long-term solution. All right, so final question here, Michael. I think this has been awesome, and you've had a lot of good words of wisdom. What advice would you have for somebody who's thinking about, I've finally made it, I've got the finances in order, my kids are maybe done with college or whatever it might be, they're planning for their grandkids, and they're ready to kind of make that leap for a lifestyle investment in the mountains, and they're thinking about a new build. What advice would you have for them?
well, not to sound self-serving, but give me a
Call
call.
Michael first. Yeah.
Um, and we'll see if the relationship thing is there. And um, I'm joking. I just think that people really need to put as much, like I go back to the whole thing about partnership. You choose your partners and friends in life, choose wisely. Um, do your research, be patient up front because a lot of times people want to get going. And even though a house, from the time we design it to build it, it's going to take a couple of years, still be patient. The house will take less time to build if you put more time preparing up front. It's a journey. You don't fly to another country and just walk up to somebody on the street and say, can you take me across the country and show me about?" No, you do your research and you follow and find, or you find a good guide and you follow that person and you actually, trust them because you've done your research and all that kind of stuff. So, um, I just think, and the other thing is, um, they're the best builder or the best designer, the best architect, maybe doesn't have the largest marketing platform. Maybe so don't so I tell you, it's the same thing. Don't necessarily fall for um a something that's just loud and shiny and all of those kind of stuff when you're hiring somebody in our profession. Um, just do your due diligence and and rely on your common sense and be